The dining room glowed with warm lights, laughter, and the comforting aroma of roasted turkey. 23 guests filled every chair around the long oak table, chatting over glasses of wine and festive decorations. It looked like the perfect family Christmas gathering, but appearances often concealed painful truths. Ethan Brooks had been awake since before dawn preparing the meal. At 68, his hands were slower than they once had been, yet every recipe still carried the same care his late wife, Grace, had taught him decades earlier. The turkey had gone into the oven before sunrise, basted with butter and herbs just the way she always insisted. The mashed potatoes were creamy, the stuffing perfectly seasoned, and every pie sat cooling on the kitchen counter, exactly as she would have wanted. Although everyone praised the dinner, no one thanked the man who had cooked it. Instead, Ethan quietly moved between the kitchen and dining room, refilling dishes, collecting empty plates, and making sure every guest was comfortable. To everyone watching, he looked more like hired help than the owner of the memories that filled the house. At the head of the table sat his daughter, Lauren, dressed elegantly and smiling confidently as she entertained guests. Beside her sat her husband, Nathan, who eagerly shared stories about his growing design business. Nathan lifted his wine glass with pride. "I've worked incredibly hard to build the life we have today," he announced. "5 years ago, I was working from a tiny apartment. Now look at this beautiful home." He swept his hand dramatically around the dining room. "The best things come to those willing to outwork everyone else." Several guests nodded in admiration. Ethan remained silent. He knew something none of them did. The house Nathan proudly claimed as his achievement had never belonged to him. Lauren suddenly tapped her spoon against her glass. The conversation stopped. "I'd like everyone's attention for just a moment," she said with a cheerful smile. Ethan looked up from the serving bowl he was carrying. "Dad," Lauren began, "there's something we've been meaning to discuss." Her voice sounded polite, almost rehearsed. "Starting next month, you'll need to contribute $1,200 every month if you want to continue living here." Silence filled the room. Several guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. Lauren continued before Ethan could answer. "We've supported you long enough. Utilities, food, your room, everything cost money. It's only fair that everyone contributes." Nathan leaned back in his chair with a smug expression. "Honestly, Ethan," he added, "most people your age help around the house or watch the grandchildren. Instead, you're just here." A few guests lowered their eyes. Others pretended to study their plates. Nathan shrugged. "If you can't afford the rent, maybe it's time to find somewhere else to live." The words struck harder than any shout ever could. Ethan felt every pair of eyes turned toward him. His chest tightened, but his face remained calm. Lauren reached into a folder beside her chair and slid several papers across the table. "I've already prepared a rental agreement," she said. "Just sign it tonight." The papers stopped in front of Ethan. He lowered his eyes. For a moment, everything around him faded. In the upper corner of the document sat a familiar logo, a strong oak tree whose roots formed the outline of a house. His heart skipped. It was the logo he and Grace had created nearly 40 years earlier, while sketching ideas on a napkin inside a roadside cafe. The company they had built together still owned every inch of the property. Lauren didn't know. Nathan certainly didn't know. They were demanding rent from the very man who legally owned the house. A strange calm settled over Ethan. Not anger, not sadness, something colder. He slowly untied the faded kitchen apron around his waist. He folded it carefully once, then again, he placed it neatly on the counter before looking directly at his daughter. "You're absolutely right," he said quietly. His calm voice surprised everyone. No one should live on someone else's property without paying their share. Lauren smiled, believing she had won. Ethan picked up the small suitcase that had been packed for weeks and resting quietly in his bedroom closet. He had prepared for this night long before Christmas arrived. As he reached the doorway, he turned back one final time. "Beginning tomorrow," he said, "everyone in this house will finally understand what that truly means." Without another word, he walked down the hallway. The unsigned rental agreement remained untouched on the dining table. Behind him, 23 guests sat frozen in complete silence. None of them realized that Christmas dinner had just marked the beginning of a battle that would change every one of their lives. Ethan closed the bedroom door behind him and leaned against it, allowing the silence to replace the noise of the celebration outside. The laughter returned to the dining room after several uneasy moments, but it sounded distant now, as though it belonged to another house entirely. He looked around the small bedroom at the end of the hallway. 3 years earlier, when Lauren had invited him to move in, she had described it as the perfect room. In reality, it was the smallest bedroom in the house, its single window facing a brick wall next door. He had accepted it without complaint because being close to his daughter had mattered more than comfort. Now it felt like a waiting room before a final goodbye. Ethan opened the nightstand drawer and removed a thick blue folder. Inside were documents he had gathered over the previous month. The first page was the original property agreement. The second was the company ownership certificate. The third showed the current market rental value of the house. Lauren and Nathan paid only $600 each month, a family discount Ethan had personally approved years ago. The home's actual rental value was nearly $8,000 a month. He sighed. Neither of them had ever asked who truly owned the property. They had simply assumed it belonged to them. Setting the folder aside, Ethan opened his closet and pulled out the suitcase that had been packed for weeks. He had learned long ago that difficult conversations rarely arrived without warning. Something about Nathan's growing arrogance over the past year had convinced him to prepare for the worst. Every important document had already been moved to a secure location. Every valuable record had been copied. Every legal paper was safely stored where no one else could reach it. He was ready. As he zipped the suitcase, his eyes drifted toward an old photograph hanging on the wall. It showed him standing beside Grace on the day they opened their first woodworking shop. Both were covered in sawdust. Both were smiling. Both believed the future belonged to them. Ethan carefully removed the picture from the wall. His heart skipped. The backing had been opened. A small envelope Grace had hidden inside years earlier was gone. She had once smiled and said, "If you ever lose your way, you'll find what you need inside this frame." Someone had already found it. His fingers tightened around the photograph. Who had taken it? Lauren? Nathan? Or someone else? The answer mattered. Outside his bedroom, footsteps echoed down the hallway before fading away. Ethan slipped the empty frame into his suitcase. His thoughts drifted back more than 40 years. Back then, he and Grace had almost nothing. Their first workshop was a tiny rented building with a leaking roof and worn-out equipment they could barely afford. They worked side by side every day. Grace handled the bookkeeping while Ethan built furniture by hand. Some nights they slept in the workshop because paying rent on both a home and the business was impossible. Yet neither complained. They believed honest work would eventually reward them. Little by little, it did. One satisfied customer became 10. 10 became 100. Within a decade, their company supplied handcrafted furniture across several states. Grace managed every financial detail with remarkable precision. Ethan focused on craftsmanship. Together they built more than a successful business. They built a life. When Lauren was a little girl, she often rode her bicycle to the workshop after school. She would climb onto a stool beside her father and watch him smooth rough oak into beautiful tables and cabinets. "Dad," she once asked, gently touching a wooden tabletop, "why does the wood feel warm?" Ethan smiled. "Because trees spend years standing in the sunshine," he answered. "They remember the warmth." Lauren had thought about that for several seconds before asking another question. "Do they remember us too?" Grace, standing nearby with a ledger in her hands, smiled without interrupting. "I think they do," Ethan replied softly. Those memories now felt painfully distant. Somewhere along the way, the little girl who admired honest work had become a woman who measured people by money. Ethan wasn't sure exactly when that change had happened. Perhaps it had been gradual. Perhaps he had simply failed to notice. He closed the folder and carried his suitcase toward the bedroom door. Tomorrow morning, he would leave before anyone else woke. Lauren believed she had given her father an ultimatum. Nathan believed he had humiliated an old man in front of 23 witnesses. Neither realized they had just challenged the founder of the company that quietly owned their home, their vehicle, and much of the comfortable life they proudly displayed. By sunrise, the first move would belong to Ethan. And unlike the argument at Christmas dinner, this time he intended to finish what others had started. Before dawn broke on December 26, Ethan quietly carried his suitcase through the silent hallway. The Christmas decorations still sparkled, and empty wine glasses remained scattered across the dining table. The celebration was over, but its bitterness lingered in every corner of the house. He paused one last time in the foyer. For years, he had watched Lauren and Nathan treat the estate as though it belonged entirely to them. They entertained clients, hosted lavish dinners, and proudly accepted compliments for a home they had never earned. Ethan simply opened the front door and stepped into the cold morning air. A pickup truck waited half a block away. Behind the wheel sat Daniel Foster, Ethan's oldest friend, and the operations director of Brooks Heritage Furniture. They had worked together for more than 30 years, building the company from a small workshop into one of the region's most respected furniture manufacturers. Daniel climbed out and placed Ethan's suitcase in the truck bed. "You all right?" he asked quietly. Ethan looked back at the house. "I've had better Christmas mornings." Daniel nodded. "I figured." Neither man spoke during the drive across town. Their friendship had never depended on constant conversation. Silence between them was comfortable, built on decades of trust. They eventually reached a modest apartment building Ethan had rented several weeks earlier. Only Daniel knew it existed. Inside, the apartment was simple but warm. A fresh pot of coffee sat waiting on the kitchen counter. Daniel poured 2 mugs. "I suspected something like this might happen," he admitted. "So did I." Ethan placed the blue folder on the table. "I started preparing almost a month ago." Daniel opened it carefully. Inside were copies of property deeds, company ownership certificates, financial records, and lease agreements. Everything had been organized with remarkable precision. "You really own the house," Daniel said. "The company does, and Lauren has no idea." Ethan slowly shook his head. "She believes Nathan bought it after their wedding." Daniel sighed. He never asked questions. "No." Ethan stared into his coffee. He simply accepted the story that benefited him. Daniel turned another page. The lease agreement clearly showed that Lauren and Nathan occupied the estate under a special family accommodation approved by Ethan years earlier. Monthly rent, $600. Current market value, $7,900. Daniel looked up. "They're paying less than 10% of what the property is worth. I wanted Lauren to have a comfortable start." Instead, comfort had become entitlement. Daniel closed the folder. "There's something else you need to know." He reached into his briefcase and removed several documents from the accounting department. "Our bank contacted me yesterday." Ethan frowned. "Why?" "There was a loan application." He slid the papers across the table. $300,000. Ethan scanned the documents, his expression hardened. The guarantor's signature belonged to him, except he had never signed it. "This isn't my signature." Daniel nodded. "I know. They wanted me to guarantee a business loan for Nathan's company." Ethan carefully compared the forged signature to his own. Someone had practiced. It looked convincing, but it wasn't genuine. The bank's fraud department had noticed subtle differences in the handwriting and contacted Daniel before approving the application. If they hadn't questioned it, Daniel said, the loan would already be processed. Ethan leaned back. Nathan hadn't simply insulted him. He had attempted to use his identity. That crossed a line no apology could erase. "There are more things." Daniel handed him another folder. "Our inventory numbers haven't matched for months." "Missing stock?" Daniel nodded. "Mostly expensive custom furniture." "How much?" "Over $200,000. Ethan remained silent. The company had always operated honestly. Every piece of furniture represented someone's hard work. Someone was stealing from the business, Daniel continued. "I've kept everything quiet. No one else knows?" "Only our attorney." Ethan nodded approvingly. "Good. They would need proof before confronting anyone." A few minutes later, Daniel's phone rang. He answered briefly before ending the call. That was Margaret. Margaret Collins had served as the company's lawyer for nearly a decade. She wants to meet this morning. Ethan smiled faintly. I was hoping she'd say that. Daniel gathered the folders. She says there are several legal actions we can take immediately. Ethan stood and walked toward the apartment window. Snowflakes drifted lazily across the empty street below. Lauren believed her father had nowhere to go. Nathan believed Christmas dinner had ended with victory. Neither realized events had already moved beyond family disagreements. This was no longer about hurt feelings. It was about fraud, forgery, theft, and the mistaken belief that an elderly man could be pushed aside simply because he chose kindness over confrontation. Ethan picked up his coat. For years, he had built furniture one careful piece at a time. Strong foundations, allied joints, nothing rushed. Today would be no different. He wasn't interested in revenge. He wanted the truth. And before the new year arrived, everyone involved would discover exactly who had been standing quietly in the background all along. By 9 o'clock the following morning, Ethan and Daniel were seated across from Margaret Collins in her downtown law office. The attorney had already arranged 3 thick folders across the conference table, each labeled neatly with colored tabs. She greeted them with a firm handshake before getting straight to business. I reviewed every document you sent last night, Margaret said. There are several issues that require immediate action. Ethan nodded. Let's hear them. Margaret opened the first folder. The easiest matter involves the company credit card. She slid a statement across the table. This is a supplemental card issued under your personal account. Lauren has been using it for nearly 3 years. Ethan glanced at the balance. His eyebrows lifted slightly. I don't remember authorizing half of these purchases. You probably didn't. Margaret turned another page. Luxury boutiques, spa resorts, D-star handbags, 5-star hotels, expensive restaurants. During the previous 12 months alone, more than $90,000 had been charged to the account. Daniel let out a slow whistle. I knew they spent freely, he said. I didn't know it was this bad. Margaret folded her hands. As the primary account holder, you can cancel the supplemental card immediately. No notice is required. Ethan didn't hesitate. Do it. She made a note. Done. The second folder contained vehicle records. The black SUV Nathan drives is registered to Brooks Heritage Furniture, Margaret explained. He was granted temporary use for business purposes only. She pointed to a highlighted paragraph. The authorization clearly states the company may revoke permission at any time. Daniel smiled slightly. So we can take it back, immediately. Margaret nodded. I've already prepared the retrieval notice. Ethan looked at the document. Send it tomorrow morning. It will be delivered before 9. Margaret reached for the third folder. This one concerns the house. Her expression became more serious. The lease agreement Lauren signed contains multiple violations. She listed them one by one. Unauthorized renovations, commercial events hosted without permission, using the property address during business transactions, repeated failure to pay the agreed monthly rent. Each violation was supported by photographs, invoices, emails, and financial records. Daniel shook his head in disbelief. They ignored every condition. They assumed no one would ever check, Margaret replied. She placed a summary sheet before Ethan. The unpaid rent, repair costs, and contractual penalties totaled just over $34,000. Silence filled the room. Ethan stared at the number for several moments. He wasn't shocked by the money. He was saddened by what it represented. Broken trust, broken promises. A daughter who had forgotten the sacrifices that built her comfortable life. Margaret finally asked the question, "Do you wish to proceed?" Ethan looked out the office window. He remembered Lauren as a little girl proudly handing him nails while he built furniture. He remembered Grace laughing in their tiny workshop. He remembered believing family would always come before money. Those memories felt painfully distant. When he turned back, his decision was made. Yes, Margaret simply nodded. I'll begin immediately. The meeting ended shortly before noon. As Ethan and Daniel walked toward the parking garage, Daniel broke the silence. Do you think they'll understand what's happening? They won't? And when they do? Ethan paused beside his car. They'll realize this was never about rent. That afternoon, Ethan returned to his apartment and settled into the quiet. For the first time in months, He picked up a block of white oak and began shaping it with an old hand plane. Each smooth stroke reminded him of simpler days. Wood never lied. It never pretended to be something it wasn't. If treated with patience and respect, it became stronger over time. People, unfortunately, weren't always the same. His phone buzzed just after 3 o'clock, Daniel. "It's already started," his friend said. "What happened?" Lauren tried using the company credit card. Ethan remained silent. It was declined. He could almost picture her expression. Daniel continued. "She called the bank from the store, and they informed her the primary account holder canceled the card this morning." Ethan slowly set the hand plane on the workbench. This was only the beginning. Tomorrow Nathan would lose the company vehicle. Soon afterward, both of them would receive legal notices regarding the house they believed was theirs. Neither one realized every move had already been planned long before Christmas dinner. Ethan wasn't acting out of revenge. He was protecting everything he and Grace had spent 4 decades building. For years he had remained silent because he believed kindness would eventually be appreciated. Christmas had taught him otherwise. Now the truth would speak louder than he ever had. The next morning arrived cold and gray. At exactly 8:30 a.m., Nathan parked the black company SUV outside an office tower, where he was scheduled to meet one of the biggest clients of his career. He straightened his tie, grabbed his briefcase, and smiled confidently as he stepped onto the sidewalk. Before he reached the entrance, 2 men wearing company jackets approached him. "Mr. Nathan Carter?" one of them asked politely. "Yes. I'm here on behalf of Brooks Heritage Furniture." Nathan frowned. "What is this about?" The employee handed him an envelope. "Your authorization to use this vehicle has been revoked. We're here to recover company property." Nathan laughed. "There must be some mistake. This SUV belongs to me." The employee calmly opened a folder. "It is registered to Brooks Heritage Furniture. You signed a temporary use agreement 2 years ago." Nathan's smile disappeared. He flipped through the paperwork. His own signature appeared on every page. This can't be happening." "I'm afraid it is." People entering the building slowed down to watch. Nathan's client stood only a few feet away, observing the entire exchange. With no legal argument left, Nathan reluctantly handed over the keys. The employees photographed the vehicle, completed the inspection report, and drove away. Nathan stood frozen on the sidewalk. His most important business meeting ended before it ever began. Across town, Lauren stared at the legal documents spread across her dining table. Her confidence from Christmas night had vanished. The notice listed every lease violation: unauthorized renovations, missed rent payments, commercial use of the property, outstanding financial obligations totaling more than $34,000. She immediately called Margaret Collins. "There has to be some mistake," Lauren pleaded. "There isn't," Margaret replied calmly. "The documents are supported by signed agreements and financial records." "But this is my home." "No," Margaret answered gently. "It is company property." Lauren felt the room begin to spin. "My father approved everything." "Your father owns the company." Silence filled the line. "What?" Margaret spoke carefully. "Mr. Brooks has remained the sole owner since the business was established. Every major asset, including the house, is legally controlled by him." Lauren lowered the phone. For the first time in years, she realized how little she actually knew about the man she called her father. That afternoon, Ethan agreed to meet Lauren. She arrived alone, without expensive jewelry, without designer clothes, without the confidence she had worn only days earlier. She stepped into Ethan's apartment and looked around the modest living room. "This is where you've been staying?" Ethan nodded. "I wanted somewhere peaceful." Lauren's eyes filled with tears. "Dad, why didn't you tell me? I tried for years. You never said you owned everything." Ethan smiled sadly. "You never asked," lowered her head. "I believed Nathan. I know. I thought." Her voice broke. "I thought you were retired with nothing left." Ethan looked at the framed photograph of Grace sitting on the bookshelf. "Your mother and I built that company together. We never wanted our success to become our identity." Lauren covered her face with both hands. "I'm so sorry." "For what?" "For forgetting who you are." Ethan remained quiet. She continued through tears. "I treated you like a burden." "You did. I embarrassed you. You did. I chose money over family. This time Ethan didn't answer. The silence hurt far more than any accusation. After several moments, Lauren whispered, "Can you ever forgive me?" Ethan looked at his daughter for a long time. "I'll always love you." She looked up hopefully. "But trust," he said softly, "is built the same way your mother and I built furniture." She waited, one careful piece at a time. Fresh tears rolled down her cheek. "I understand, no." Ethan gently shook his head. "I don't think you do yet." He walked to the window overlooking the quiet street. "When your mother and I started our business, we had almost nothing. We worked because we believed character mattered more than comfort." He turned back toward Lauren. "I gave you opportunities I never had. I should have also taught you that wealth is something you protect with humility, not pride." Lauren quietly nodded. "I want to make things right, then start telling the truth." She wiped her eyes. "I will, and accept responsibility. I will. No excuses. I promise." Ethan smiled for the first time in days. "It won't be easy, I know, but difficult roads often lead to better people." Lauren stood and hugged her father. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. The embrace didn't erase the pain. It didn't repair broken trust, but it marked the first honest moment they had shared in years. Months later, the legal cases concluded. Nathan was held responsible for forged documents and fraudulent financial activities. The stolen company assets were recovered through the investigation. Brooks Heritage Furniture continued to grow under Ethan's careful leadership. While Daniel became its official president, Ethan eventually retired, not because anyone forced him to, but because he finally chose the right time. He spent his days teaching young craftsmen the values that had guided him throughout his life. Whenever someone admired a finished piece of furniture, he would gently run his hand across the polished wood and repeat the words he had once told a little girl many years before. "Strong things aren't built in a single day. They're built with patience, honesty, and care. And those who forget that lesson often discover that the strongest foundation was never money. It was character."